Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy Swedlow, and this is Televisionation, the Swedlow Show. And I am really excited to welcome Megan Chao. And she is a documentary TV producer and has done so much work and also has been, I think, 2 decades creating impactful content for platforms like Netflix, PBS, Nova, and she is VP of Development and Production at Bierman Productions and a governor at the Television Academy in, I guess, documentary films. Is that
Documentary
correct?
programming. Yep.
Documentary programming. And I believe you are also a teacher at USC Annenberg, where you are helping people learn how to create the future of television or the TV of tomorrow. I should use my own branding. Welcome to the show, Megan.
Thank you, Tracy. It's wonderful to be here with you.
So, just shortly, I mean, you have had so much experience, and there are various pieces out on the streaming platforms that people can check out. So, for example, I highly recommend on Netflix the Cyntoia Brown Story, which is fantastic, and it's a one-piece documentary film, and it's all about a young woman who started at 16 and had to deal with being in prison. It's a long story, but it's a wonderful piece and many other things. So let's talk a little bit about what you do at Berman Productions, just briefly, and then I will ask you questions about what it's like to be a documentary producer.
Sure. I started my career about 2008 as a documentary producer, and I started as a researcher long time ago for a show on Discovery and TLC about Captain Chesley Sullenberger's landing on the Hudson River. We all remember that event in New York.
Yes.
And in the years convening after that, I worked my way up the ranks and I'm now a showrunner and a picture editor. But one of the things about documentary, I think, anybody who knows the nonfiction world is that, we often wear many hats. And so we're often multi-hyphenate. And so I spend a part of my time developing content ideas and pitching them to networks. And, when we have the good fortune of, getting something funded, I'm out in the field producing and then, when we get all that footage back, I edit the show and deliver it. So, I've had my hands, in most of the process of documentary filmmaking. And yeah, that's sort of my job role in a nutshell.
You started as a student of science, and you've branched out into other areas, like you were dealing with crime and accidents, like the Sullenberger. I can't
Yeah.
remember his last name. But you've done a lot of pieces, like for Nova on uh, dark matter, or maybe that was the Big Bang machine.
Yep.
So you started off in science. What personal story do you have that inspired you to become a documentary science producer? Just like, how did you get started? Because I just feel like there's not enough programming out there. And why have you embraced that? Which I'm so thrilled you have.
Yeah. I have a passion and a love for science and health and technology, and just, the fact that there are so many amazing people out there who innovate and think of things that, no ordinary person really can sort of imagine. I myself, as you mentioned, I was a biology major. I do have a degree in biology. But when I was an undergrad at UC Riverside, I really fell in love with creative writing and picked that up as a second major. And so as I was going through my undergrad experience, I had these sort of parallel journeys going. And it was a professor of mine, a creative writing professor, who, you know, uh, wanted to speak with me after class one day and said, "Hey, I think you have a real gift for communicating science. And, just to put it out there are people who write for magazines like Science and Nature, and there's a real need for communicating really complex stuff to a lay audience." And I thought about that. And, at that time too, like Discovery and Nat Geo had all of like the major science programming. Nat Geo had the Naked Science series with, which explored different facets of space and physics. And, you had Untold Stories of the ER. And, I really loved that programming. And so I wanted to be a part of creating that programming. So when it came time to decide between medical school or journalism school, I decided to go to journalism school because there was a pathway to get into long form storytelling, and that's that's sort of where my career took me.
Did your parents freak out when you told them you didn't want to be a doctor?
Absolutely, yeah. They freaked out for many years after I graduated from grad school too, but when they realized I could pay my rent, they were fine.
We've heard that story so many times, but then if you follow your passion, you're going to be successful, hopefully. Are
Hopefully.
there any stories out there or that you would like to tell, but you haven't yet? I know you're doing Earth Focus right now, which is about climate change, or no, not Earth Focus. Yes.
Yes, yeah. Earth Focus is a documentary series on PBS SoCal. We're right now we're in the middle of producing 8 episodes, season 6 and 7, and each episode explores a different topic within the realm of environmental and sustainability. And so we sort of tackle different topics like, oil production in LA, or fast fashion's impact on the environment and food inequality. And it really focuses on like the individual and the community interaction, the urban, how urban cities can impact the environment. And so we're in post production right now. Really excited to see that on the air this summer. But in terms of other stories that I'm interested in, I really just have to say I think a good story is a good story, and I don't sort of peg myself into specific categories. I think the joy of documentary is that if you're curious about something, and if you meet interesting characters, and you can find the interesting characters, and things happen all the time that need to be chronicled and sort of documented as a part of history. I think um, that's the joy of being in this world, is that no matter what you're interested in, you can tell a story around it. So if there is a story that, there are some stories I want to tell. I'm not sure I'm ready to talk about them yet, but I will say that, there are some social issues that I'd like to tackle, sort of centered around, women and the safety of women in certain situations. And always the next scientific discovery is always very interesting to me too. So yeah.
To what extent do, does the business model of television today, and I'm going to go into those in a few minutes, about the different platforms and fast and broadcasting and the different deals you have. I mean, what's the process of decision making, or what are the pressures that influence you and Baron Productions as to what you pursue next? Is it really about just getting something that somebody's paying for? Can you follow something and then you pitch it to somebody? Like, what's the process and what are the pressures?
Yeah, documentary is really complex, I think, in that way, where business models are always evolving. For us as a company, we've funded our projects in different ways. We've received grants for portions of development and production, which sort of get us part of the way there, and we can pursue finishing funds. So cobbling together different sources of funding to sort of get through an idea. If the concept, and usually you have to do that if the concept isn't something that the networks want to pick up right away, but something that we as a company decide that we want to pursue and are passionate about. um and in most cases, we pitch our ideas directly to broadcasters, and we go into the networks and meet with the development executives. And usually, that's because we have regular conversations with them about what they're looking for, what the marketplace threshold is. True crime continues to be seller for documentaries, and I'm sure you see it all over the place.
Well, I see it in as much as my husband and my daughter are obsessed. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I know everybody else is too. I
Yeah.
prefer science programming, but it's completely compelling. I watched the Cyntoia Brown story, which was, I think, a beautiful, meaningful story about this young woman's, incarceration and what happens to her and how she raises herself up from this terrible situation. I highly recommend it,
Thank you.
everybody.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting you mentioned, Murder to Mercy, that was a 16-year project. The first 7 years were fun. It was my director and executive producer who sort of self-funded until the end when we got finishing funds from Independent Lens, and gave us a platform on PBS. And then we chose to follow the story to the end. There were times throughout the process where we didn't know, what was going to happen with her, because the justice system, it moves slow as molasses, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And so for a lot of that, we use the profits from our other projects, to sort of keep us going on that project until there was a definitive ending, which our business loves definitive endings. Networks like to know that there's going to be a solid beginning, middle, and end in every story that they commission. And it wasn't until Cyntoia was receiving clemency from the governor where Netflix made the decision to come in and say,
Spoiler.
yeah. uh, that it was at that point they decided that it was a good story for them on their platform. So, going back to your question about the business model, there are just so many ways to slice the pie, and I think documentary filmmakers are probably the most resilient and the most creative in terms of finding funding for their projects, because a lot of the things that we tackle are passion projects, and they're born out of our own curiosity, and so we look for ways to fund our projects in all sorts of different ways.
Always rooting for the documentary category at the Academy, because that's those are the important pieces really these days, I think,
Yeah.
compared to the crap. I'm sorry. That's my personal opinion. That's winning
Yeah.
otherwise. Okay, back to business. So, where do you think these days that the documentary filmmaking is thriving? So for our audience, they're interested in Netflix and Hulu and Curiosity Stream and Max and all of these kinds of platforms, or is it broadcast? Or short form. Where are you seeing people really passionate about watching your content? Obviously, the Cyntoia Brown story is available on Netflix.
Yep.
Uh, what do you think?
I think we all know that the market has contracted substantially, especially with the strikes and with all of the things going on globally. That's impacted so many of our friends and colleagues in the industry who've been laid off over the past couple of years, and that's tough. Similarly, I think the networks and the streamers have also pulled back quite a bit on what they're willing to pay for. And so it's narrowed the marketplace in terms of like topics. You really have to find the thing that rises above the noise. In terms of appetite for documentary and nonfiction content, I think it's hungrier than ever. And I think that, young people, they look for content through social media or fast channels. I know fast channels are very popular with that generation, and they'll readily share clips of documentaries and nonfiction programs to sort of get the word out and get other people to watch. New distribution platforms have emerged like Jolt and Kinema, which give filmmakers the power to distribute a little bit more in their control, in terms of finding a platform for their work. And there's still the traditional routes where you get a commission on broadcast, or you get a commission through streamers. And you can also go through international distributors to try to find other territories who might pick up your project if it's relevant, sort of fund that way. So the answer to your question about the appetite, I think it's hungrier than ever. I think people are fascinated by other people. People are fascinated by, I mean, crime always. For some reason, people like to know other people who experience murder and violence and all of that stuff. The backstories about what drives people to certain points. But what's that?
No, I try to explain to my daughter though, why I have a hard time watching horror films and sometimes crime pieces and things like that. And I said I used to love all that content as a kid, but as a mother now, I find it a little more challenging. My husband, not so much. He likes to watch it, but I that's I mean, it's still very compelling. It's still entertaining, but I feel, that I would prefer to watch science programming.
There are other things, yes.
But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
do you use any platforms that give you data to help you make these decisions? Do you use ways to track? Do you get reporting from the networks you collaborate with? How do you make decisions? Is it just on instinct and gut? Or are you using data?
Well, the networks themselves are using data significantly. So, the traditional cable networks definitely lean into their programming departments to give them, the analytics on their viewership. Streamers haven't shared that data as openly and as readily, but they all of the data in both cases inform the mandates that the networks put out to the producers who are creating the content. So, like Nat Geo will say, we have an interest in social justice issues, and the environment. Nat Geo's had some spectacular documentaries, always, but in recent years, things like The Territory, or um, the Jimmy Chin documentaries, that really highlight incredible people doing crazy things. I think the extraordinary really is what drives, Nat Geo programming, and giving audiences a window into those worlds, is what they're about, and exploration, obviously. Um, so the each of the networks have a brand, and they have um ideas about what their viewers gravitate toward, and that translates to us as content creators as, hey, these are the buckets that we're looking to fill in our programming. Can you bring us something in those areas, and let's talk about it. And so, for as a production company, and as as part of our development efforts, it's sort of a combination of the things that we're interested in, but also the things that the networks are looking for. And it's this, we have to achieve this balance to make sure that we have a chance at landing a show on a network. We have to be smart about what we're pitching.
So you must have a lot of creative decisions to make between um, what platform it's probably going to appear on. Is it a fast? Is it a streamer? Is it a broadcaster? And that's one set of considerations. And then we mentioned before the call that you're on the APA as an advisor about Gen AI, and I'm kind of curious about the creative consideration you need to make about whether to use Gen AI when you're making a documentary film producer. Is that becoming part of the overall set of decisions you have to make to convey an idea, or is it always really? I mean, maybe that's completely not authentic, obviously, but I'm kind of curious. Is that creeping in? Is that as are these streamers and other organizations asking for that kind of content yet? Or
Yeah,
it's kind of a complex question.
Yeah,
Do you see where I'm going with this?
I do. Yeah. Yes, I am part of the Archival Producers Alliance Gen AI Advisory Board, and it is a complicated topic. And I think it doesn't matter what genre of television you work in, the concerns are there. I think for nonfiction and for documentary, we're probably on one side of that extreme where, you start introducing Gen AI and maybe it challenges the integrity of the storytelling. It's certainly not something that we seek out, but I think there have been, and people have feelings about it one way or the other. There have been instances where, like the Anthony Bourdain documentary a few years ago, Roadrunner, did incorporate AI to recreate his voice for a soundbite. And that's certainly been done in recent years more frequently, I think. I think the important thing about using Gen AI in documentary is the disclosure. Letting your audience know that it is being employed as a tool to
I think there was
create.
The Andy
Yeah,
Warhol set. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry to
Um,
interrupt.
yeah, and so APA has done an incredible job of sort of getting in front of the discussion around Gen AI and documentary use specifically. And the mentality is not don't use it at all, but it's be careful in how you use it, be intentional about how you're using it, and just making sure that the audience is aware that you're using it. We don't want to use it in a deceptive way because documentary as a craft is we're preserving historical record in some way, shape, or form in our work, and that's important. I will say though, I think with the threat to the National Archives and the purging of historical record that is currently happening, I think, and also, the difficulty for journalists to get information through the Freedom of Information Act, I think it's going to be a little bit of a we'll see what happens sort of phase, because if we can't have access to the actual historical photos and records and things that we might include in our documentaries, you might start seeing more filmmakers leaning into AI to sort of create those images. And that I think is a very dangerous path to go down.
That's definitely very concerning.
Yeah.
I mean, I think all of us today are worrying whether all these videos that we see in the news, are they being touched and manipulated and generated? And I think they are probably. And
It's getting sophisticated enough that we are having a harder time being able to tell, I think.
well, and speaking of which, what do you think about the impact of short form social media on your ability to tell stories? Obviously, a great way to promote, but
Yeah.
and the young people are all watching, those platforms rather than connected TV. Although we're trying to find ways for them to also transfer. But
Yeah.
how is that impacting you? Are you clipping all of your pieces? Do you feel compelled to use the social platforms? What's happening?
Social media is definitely a powerful and impactful way to engage people. And, yeah, as you mentioned, the younger generation, but also I think a lot of the older generation too, with the scrolling and running across content, I think it's important for everybody to sort of embrace that as a marketing tool. Um, I mean, yeah, when we create our content ideas and out of the shows that we are producing, there is a mindfulness around also capturing vertical video, while we're out in the field to sort of create ancillary content around the documentary itself. People love the behind the scenes stuff. So if there's stuff that our characters can offer outside of the narrative arc that we tell within the show, if they have other things, other messages outside of that, sometimes social media can be great for that. And I think it's just important as content creators to really think about meeting the audiences where they are. And so it just means getting creative and adding other elements to the production work and the editing work itself.
In the fiction world, there's that huge pressure to embed advertising or to find new ways to generate revenue other than just, through a fast, experience. Obviously, documentary film making has always not embraced advertising or done anything like that, I think. Or is it creeping in? What is that? Is that a pressure on you to monetize that way?
No, I mean, for us, as a company, that's not something that we've traditionally thought about. I know there are folks within the industry, though, in nonfiction who do some branded content, and you can have, a documentary that's sort of sponsored by, certain brands, to tell like a story around something relevant to their brand, and that has become common marketplace practice. I don't know how. I mean, I think the advertisers have been hit hard as well in this industry contraction, but there is a sector within the nonfiction realm that operates this way. I just haven't traditionally done that work.
Well, let me ask a different question, not business related, but
Sure.
you know, uh, when you're actually producing a piece, this is more personal.
Yeah.
When you're actually producing a piece and you have all these other pressures, to make sure that this is going to get noticed by the streamers, and you need to make sure that there has an ending and stuff. I mean, to what extent does this impact your ability to tell a really strong story? How emotionally, um, you know, uh, impactful. That's not the right way to put this, but how, uh, how are you emotionally involved in telling the story? Are you also thinking about the business pressures at the same time? What's your priority?
That's a good question. I think for me personally, it's really important to make sure that we're telling the story of each of the characters that we feature in our projects, in authentic and meaningful ways. I'm a journalist by training, so I come at documentary from a journalist point of view, and so accuracy and integrity of the storytelling are really important for me. And when I reach out to people and they agree to participate in a project, it's sort of a unspoken rule that because they're choosing to spend time with me and the company, and they believe in the story that we want to tell, honoring that and making sure that we get the story right and highlighting the right pieces of the story are really important. Usually, we're in alignment with the networks on what the story needs to be, but also with documentary storytelling, oftentimes like there are things that happen that come up in the interview that did not come up in the research, and there's sometimes unexpected twists and turns that happen, and we have to embrace them and pivot and be ready to tackle them. And I just say that through it all, making sure that the way we represent the story is the most important. And of course, entertainment and entertaining audiences is important too. But I think looking at it from the documentary participant side of things is really central to the way I operate as a filmmaker. I don't know if that answers your question.
Do you think the Academy is showcasing the work of documentary film producers, TV Academy or the Oscars? Do you think they're doing a good job of this, or do you think they could be doing more? And if so, what?
Well, I mean, when you look at I can't speak to the operations of both entities. That's outside of my realm here. But I think the Emmys and the Oscars both give a platform and a way for, creatives to compete to be the best of in the genre. Obviously if the marketing teams for certain shows invest in a strategy that includes FYC screenings, for example, to get the word out, that's certainly a way for awareness to happen. But in terms of the two academies themselves, I don't think that's part of the mission of their, existences to sort of push the any genre really in that
No, I
way.
mean, I really, I wish they would push it more. There are other specific platforms that are very good at showcasing documentary offerings, like Magellan and Curiosity Stream and Canopy. Are you aware of Canopy, which is
Yeah, yeah.
and do you think they're doing a great job? Because they're very niche, and so they don't get a huge amount of subscription. Although Canopy, I think more people understand that it's available for free if you have a
Yeah.
library card. Do you think that those niche services are doing a good job, or could they do better?
I mean, I think in any case, it comes down to the marketing, right? And the accessibility. Um, so yeah, while Curiosity Stream is niche, I've produced several shows for them. I think it attracts audiences like you who are, who gravitate towards science programming. And I think it offers a new venue for content creators to get their work out there. Um, but I think all of it really comes down to a marketing perspective.
There I'm almost done. We've kept you beyond the 30
Oh,
minutes, I promise, but thank you so much. We didn't mention YouTube. YouTube is a gigantic collection of science documentary programming, but
yeah.
you have to know these providers or these, content creators, or they have to show up in your feed. Is that competitive to you, or what do you think about some of these people,
Um,
what they're doing?
well, look, I
I mean,
think,
they're not trained. They're not professionally trained, perhaps. They've learned it on the job, little by
yeah.
little.
No, I mean, there's something commendable and admirable about, the self-starter, the person who just wants to tell a good story and sees YouTube as a means to start getting content out there. I think you never know in this day and age what's going to be the thing that gets the attention on you and the work that you're doing. And I think YouTube offers a means to do that. I mean, look, Mr. Beast came out of YouTube and all of, so I think the more platforms that are out there, the more ways that people can be creative in getting, their stories out there, all for it, and however you need to fund your project and however you need to create a campaign to start a social movement, I think is all well within the realm of what we do as documentary filmmakers. And so if you've got the initiative to self-start and to create that channel for yourself and to put yourself out there, I think it's wonderful.
There's so many more questions, but I think we should close. My last question is what guilty pleasure TV show do you watch that's, not going to win an Emmy necessarily, but and maybe not even be documentary oriented? Is there anything you want to reveal that you like?
I have a guilty pleasure of watching the Hallmark Channel, and all things Hallmark. I watch both the series and the movie of the week, and I think part of it is because I think documentary can be so serious and so intense, a lot of the times that I just want to sort of escape from that and see a happy ending. And it's predictable, it's wonderful. I love it.
That is a wonderful way to end this interview. I think that's fantastic. Um, Thank you so much for your time, Megan, and the work that you do,
Thank you very
which is valuable. So I'm sure your parents are very proud of you.
thank you very much.
Megan Chao is the VP of production. No, sir, development and production at Bierman Productions. And look for more work from her on the Earth Focus series. And stay tuned for more. I'm Tracy Swedlow. Thank you so much for listening. Bye. Bye.